Our speaker today is Nan Lee. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Life Sciences Communication. Her teaching responsibilities include courses in visual communication and risk communication, and her research focuses on the dynamics of the interface of science, society, and policy. And this centers around socio-scientific issues related to food, energy, and climate, and her studies examine the evolving nature of media discourse and public opinion. And she also studies policymakers' perceptions of scientific evidence in such contexts. So this relates to today's talk, using Pope Francis's encyclical from 2015 as a case study to understanding how climate change is communicated and how different groups might perceive some of that communication. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks, Scott, for the nice introduction. And hi, everybody. Actually, this is very new to me. Like right now, I don't know how you guys see this room, but I'm actually speaking to a fairly empty room with one lovely audience. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you guys for joining online. I hope you can hear me and see me well. So I'm Nellie, and I'm assistant professor in the Department of Life Sciences Communication. So today, I want to talk about Pope Francis and Catholics' views on climate change. So for those of you who are not religious or affiliated with Catholic Church, I feel like this is something that can be a little distant. However, I do want to talk about it when I first, got invited by Scott, because I thought this is such an interesting case study that can potentially show like how people in this country form their opinions and attitudes about climate change, energy, sustainability issues, and many other issues that's related to science. And so another thing is, like, if you guys know or may not know, like Pope Francis is actually one of the first religious, like recognizable religious leaders that's trying to spin off the whole discourse and narrative about climate change. Before we talk about it as a scientific issue, as an economic issue, but Pope Francis, since 2015, really reframed and revamped this into more of a moral issue and use that as like a formal part of like a formal teaching for Catholic Church to promote some actions on climate change, not just within that particular religious community, but really beyond that as well. So today I want to start from just introduce some of the background, some context information, just to give people some fruitful thoughts there, and then present this study that I conducted in 2015, in collaboration with my colleagues at Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pennsylvania. So I know this is not a newest type of study, but again, as you can tell, it's really generated a lot of interesting insights into how people react to like this very strong image on climate change. Almost like a quasi-social experiment when you have like, this one messaging from this ideal source, and this will surprise you how people from different lines of religious ideology will react to that. And then after that, I would rather just have the floor open, and you guys can let me know just from online, like if you have any thoughts, and almost like any ideas about how to talk about environmental issues and climate change and other issues like energy options or clean energies or conventional energies that you guys care about and in this like increasingly polarized world. And so Pope Francis, as many of you know, is a pontiff of the Roman Catholic Church, and he is also one of the most recognizable religious leaders in the world, I would say. And he has such a huge impact in America because, as you know, 1/5 of the U.S. adult populations are Catholics. Some of the most prominent figures in this country, including the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, the current President, Joe Biden, as well as more than half of the justices at the Supreme Court are Catholic. So it definitely has a huge impact in how issues are talked about and framed in this country. Right? Since he was elected as a Pope in 2013, I think a lot of these stances on certain issues can be a little different and potentially controversial, especially for Americans. For example, he wanted to be like more inclusive with the LGBTQ communities in the church, and also, he supported climate change and really cares for the poor, and he has like a very strong critiques on free markets and capitalism. He really advocates for some radical changes in people's lives. So it can be controversial figure, but I think again, like he is very influential. So I think it's very interesting and important to study how his like positions and his like appearance and his like statements on climate change will be received by Americans. And then going back to 2015, this is the first time like a major prominent religious leader kind of acknowledged the scientific reality of climate change and also emphasized the morality that's involved in this issue. So this is a quote that I took from him in his encyclical, which is like this official church teaching document. He said that human-induced climate change is a scientific reality, and its decisive mitigation is a moral and religious imperative for humanity. So really, we frame like an otherwise scientific and economic issue into more of a morality, spiritual and religious issue. And yes.
For some reason, I guess there's some audio issues. I guess do your best to project. We'll see. Hopefully, or maybe talk a little slower. I don't know if that will help with the audio issues.
Okay, sure.
Sorry, this is what we got this new system, and we're still figuring out all the kinks in it. So
sure. Okay. So yeah, I mean, sorry, folks. To me, it's just like this one thing like dangling from the ceiling. So I don't know if that works or not. So I will slow down a little bit to make sure that people can hear clearly. So this is just the encyclical, like I got from the New York Times. This is part of the text that you can see. So first of all, for this paragraph, it talks about, the climate change issue, but also talk about how the Pope cares about every single person living on this planet. So it's not just about climate change. It's not just about environment. I think the Pope really talks about issue in a wider context that shows his care for the common good and for poor people and for the humanity. And then in this paragraph, we kind of talk about how climate change can cause very serious consequences for all of us. Again, resonating that caring for all kind of frame. And then, he kind of mentioned that, climate change will influence people along the coastal areas. And the last point is just like, after talking about the scientific consensus, the significant consequences and all the other things, he really advocated and called for the radical changes. I don't know if you guys are aware of it, but recently I think there is like a call to revive the No Meat Friday for Catholic Church because people believe that if you reduce the amount of meat consumption, it can actually help with reduce the carbon emission. And as Catholic Church, that's something that they do just by reviving that tradition, it can help with climate change. So it's not just like climate change is important and we need to pay attention to that. It's like they want people to make change. They want people to make real change to their lifestyles. And that's another reason why it's so controversial for many people. So does the sound issue better?
I guess, can people comment in the chat if the sound is any better or not? Someone says they think it's better.
Okay.
Someone says not significantly better.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe I turn on the video audio on my end would help
Maybe.
a little bit.
If you were to sit by your computer, I'll mute the speakers.
I
I'll
think
mute
that
the
would
mic
be
here,
better.
and that's.
All right. Sorry, guys.
See.
Okay, am I allowed to talk now? Okay, so how about this time? Can you guys hear me better?
Much better.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. So just for the sound purpose, I'm just gonna sit close to my computer so people can hear me better. If you don't really mind me sitting here. So just to maybe kind of recap what we just talked about, the encyclical and how it emphasized climate change as more of a moral issue instead of scientific and economic issue. And then in the encyclical, you can see that it's not just about the
importance of this issue or the scientific consensus or the consequences. It kind of talk about everything, but I think toward the end, the Pope really makes a strong statement on this needs a lifestyle changes. And I kind of talk about the recent initiative on reviving the No Meat Friday traditions in Catholic Church. So that's something to think about. And then the encyclical, after it was really released in 2015, it really turns into something bigger. And this is the Laudato Si, which is an encyclical action platform. So this is an initiative that the Vatican put together that really tries to, I would say just make some actions toward climate change. So it really, urges a lot of the Catholic affiliated institutions to, for example, reduce their investment in fuel, coal, fuel energy companies, which can be a big deal because a lot of the Catholic institutions, they are financially powerful. And in addition to that, you can see they have, ecological education missions. They want to turn this into something bigger that encourage people to make changes to our planet. And then going back to 2015, this is when this message was first released, right? So this is where the first time that the Pope put everything into this official church document. And then also in the same year, Pope visited the United States. I don't know if anybody still has memory to that, but at that time I was at Philadelphia, and that's one of the stop of Pope's visit. And that was such a big deal. So many people were there and so many people were so excited about his visit. And during his visit, it really, emphasized this environmental, message that he stand out early on. And for example, during his visit to the United Nations, he urges actions on climate change, and that was in September. And then, in addition to that, he also talked about poverty, kind of resonating with some of the things that he put in the encyclical, how climate change is not just a, developed country issue, is really an issue for everybody on the world. And then, like I said, poverty, immigration are other sub themes that's part of this bigger conversation and this bigger talk on climate change and environmental stewardship. And then at that time, you can see that Catholics really have very divided opinions on global warming and climate change. And so this data was collected by Pew Research Center back in 2015. And just some background information, Catholics in US are generally diverse, racially diverse, and also evenly split between Democrats and Republicans. So about 46% of Catholics are either Democrats or Republicans. However, if you look at their attitudes toward climate change, it's really divided, it's really different. So compared to general public, which 68% of general public think the earth is warming at that point, you can see that for Catholic Democrats, it's 85% of them. So it's really the majority of them think this is happening. However, it's not a case for Catholic Republicans. Only 51% of them think it is the case. And then when you ask about the cause of climate change, the number division is even bigger, right? So 62% of Catholic Democrats think it's caused by human activity. However, only 24% of Catholic Republicans think it is human caused. And then the similar numbers kind of show up here as well when people ask how serious of a problem this is. So it's really a divided opinion at that point when Pope has his message out and when he visited this country. And so another thing is when the encyclical was released, it's 2015, so 2016 was an election year. So this was a year where everybody was talking about politics, where everybody was talking about climate change as part of this bigger debate. And when Pope jumps in a wagon and talk about climate change, all of a sudden he had a lot of backlashes among the Republican leaders. And Rick Santorum and Jeb Bush are two presidential candidates at that time. And you can see that they were not receptive of his message and teaching at all, although both of them were Catholics. So this is from Jeb Bush. He said, "I go to church to have my faith nourished, to have my faith challenged. I don't go to mass for economic policy or for things in politics." And then for Rick Santorum, he has this very interesting commentary that says, like, when it comes to climate change, the Pope needs to leave the science with the scientists. And interestingly, Pope Francis actually has a degree in chemistry. So he does know something about science. It's not like he knows nothing about science. So I still feel like it's interesting to see how some of the politicians, political figures in this country, even though they're affiliated with the Catholic Church, they're trying to devalue the credibility of Pope when it comes to climate change in particular. So what happened, right? So what happened at that time? It's a very interesting timing, as I said, like, from a social science perspective, you have this almost like ideal setting of an experiment. So something, you have like your audiences, but something happened, it's like a quasi experiment. Some people will receive the message, some people will not receive the message. It's perfect setup to observe what kind of effect this type of messaging can cause on people. And for me, as a communication scholar, this is one of a kind opportunity to study the real effects of messaging on climate change. So this is how we collected data. At a time I was affiliated with the Annenberg Policy Center as a postdoctoral scholar. So this is not my work. This is really like a collective work. And then we did this very rigorous data collection. First of all, just surrounding the release of the encyclical in June. So before it was released on June 18th, we just launched the survey with 1381 respondents and trying to just gauge how much they know about it, right? So do they actually know the Pope has planned to release an encyclical on climate change? And then after the release of the encyclical, about right after actually, we did another survey to gauge how much people have heard about it, how they feel about it, whether that change their opinions at all. And then for this design, we also resurveyed 602 people out of the first wave, kind of just to track the same responses over the time and see if this encyclical caused any real effect on the same set of respondents. And then another set of data that we collected is surrounding the visit. So his visit was actually 3 months after the encyclical release. So that was in September. And then in September, what we did is, first of all, again, before his visit, we launched the survey, this time with a relatively larger sample, 1,700 people. And then after his visit, we collected another batch of respondents to just see if people's opinions change at all. And again, we have 730 people that we revisited and resurveyed. So it really is a strong panel data that you don't really get for social science because it costs a lot of money. But for this case, we were able to do that. So that was pretty solid. And then what have we found, right? So first of all, we asked people if you have heard or read anything about Pope Francis issuing an official church document known as encyclical on climate change and other environmental issues. And then to our surprise, well, not that surprising, but still, I feel the number could have been higher given how much news attention was given at that time to the encyclical and to his visit later in the year. And pre-encyclical, not that many people even know it. So 15.8% of people indicated that they have heard or read anything about the encyclical. And then later, after the release, it's 40%. So it's not everybody, but still, I think some people, right? So 40% of the population that we surveyed were aware of it. And then we asked people, is there any solid evidence that the average temperature on Earth has been getting warmer over the past few decades or not? And then this time we only, for this data, I only show the numbers for the people that we surveyed twice. So before and after encyclical, it's 600 people. And then before and after the visits, it's 700 people. So we want to see if his visit and his release of the church document change people's opinions at all, regarding whether climate change is happening or not. And then this time we break the data down into partisans as well. So Democrats, Independents, or Republicans. And before and post encyclical, you didn't see that much change at all. So, there's a very minimal like increase for Democrats is like a 3%, but it's like 600 people. So it's really not that many people like change their opinions before and after the encyclical, and no change for independents. And for Republicans still like there's a small like increase, but again, it's not really significant in any sense. So I would say that there's barely any change in people's opinions in terms of how they believe or whether they believe that climate change is actually happening. And then again, like for the second batch, like the before and after visit, because, thinking about like how Hope had emphasized the importance of climate change during his visit, again, like the change this time was slightly more significant among the Democrats, right? So from 89% to 96%, so almost everybody would agree that climate change is happening. Not that much change for independents, and for Republicans, you actually see a slight decrease like after his visit, like from 47% to 43%. Okay, so I want to stop there because I wonder if anybody has any questions or anything, because yes, so someone just asked a question. Thanks, Todd, for the question. Just asked like, how have Catholics' views on global warming changed since 2015? So I would just talk about that in a second. Thank you so much for that question. Yes.
What would you say? Do you think there's an influence of all the other media figures in relation to that Republican number of after his visit, all the response from Jeb Bush's and Greg Santorum's of the world to then make Republicans less likely to believe that?
Definitely. Yeah, that's, if you ask me to bet, I would bet like, $100 or something on that. I think it's definitely one of the major cause that makes people like more susceptible to like the skeptical view on climate change, is because, before it's not even something that people talk about, but since Pope was talking about and other people were trying to like disagree with him, I think that definitely has a huge impact on the Republicans. Yes, for sure. Yeah.
Wondering if you could say something about the question, which I personally believe is very crucial with regard to global warming.
Sure.
And that's the need to keep population controlled somehow. Obviously, the church has its own position on birth control, but I guess to what extent is population increase linked inextricably with the problem of environmental catastrophe and climate change?
Right. I think that's a really, really interesting question. I think that's just maybe another thing, like another message or frame that can like turn climate change into more of a moral issue, because it's not just about science, about environmental change, but it has so many other things to do with the population growth, and the church has like a very unique position on that. So yeah, I think it's definitely part of the conversation. But if you ask me, like scientifically, how the population growth will influence climate change, I think that's something that's beyond my expertise. But I mean, just based on my gut reaction, I think it definitely plays a role there. Yeah, thank you so much for the question. Any other thing that you yes, so I have another question from John that says, will you be discussing the reasons for divergence between the parties? So yeah, that's something, I don't know, maybe like folks online can chime in the discussion as well, because that's something we as scientists, social scientists have studied for so long. Why there's such a division in people's opinions regarding so many different things. It's not just about climate change, it's about, clean energy, nuclear energy, even COVID-19, so many different issues that deals with science and deals with like, human well-being, that kind of thing. You see like a huge divergence between parties in this country. And there are so many different reasons, like Scott mentioned earlier, media portrayal can definitely be part of it. And another thing is just like people sort of so stick to their own values. There are a lot of issues that people already develop their positions based on who they are. It's part of their identity. If I am Republican, if I am Democratic, there's something that I believe in no matter what. So I think this is like there's a historical reasons there as well. It's just like a long term like cultivated attitudes that turn people into who they are. And it's so hard to reverse that divergence with just like communications or engagements or outreach. But yeah, but that's just my 2 cents. I'm more than happy to hear other people's thoughts in these audiences, because I'm sure you guys will have some observations from your daily life as well. So yeah, if no other question, I will just move along. Okay. So another interesting that we found is actually like, so someone brought up this idea of divergence. And what we found is actually for people who were aware of the encyclical, they were more likely to be polarized on this issue. So this is data, again, that we collected before and after the release of the encyclical, but this time we combined both data sets. And then we only measure like if people are aware of encyclical or not. So the black line represents people who are aware of it, and the red line represents people who are unaware of it. And then what you can see is like for liberal Democrats and conservative Republicans, if they're aware of the encyclical, their attitudinal difference is more significant than those who are not aware of the encyclical. So that means like if you're aware of it, and if you're a Democrat, you're more likely to be concerned about climate change. You know, after hearing about encyclical, that would definitely increase your concern of the issue. However, the reverse is true for Republicans. So for Republicans, if you're aware of the encyclical, compared to those who are not aware of it, your level of concern actually decreased. Which we thought was really, really interesting, because I mean, the whole point of Pope's message is to convince those who are not believing climate change into believing it and to do something about it. However, obviously, based on our data, his message failed at the time of the data collection, and the same for Catholics and non-Catholics. And another question for us is just like, okay, so how do people deal with it, right? So obviously you don't want to like listen to the Pope, you kind of just deny his whole teaching on this issue, but how do you like reconcile this almost like a cognitive dissonance thing? Because part of you are like, I need to listen to him, especially for the Catholics. And then part of it is like, I don't want to trust him on this particular issue. So how do people like deal with that so-called cross pressure that's resulted from this message exposure? So in this part of the analysis, we ask people if they trust or if they think Pope Francis is credible when he speaks about a moral obligation to address climate change. And then we observe like a very similar pattern. So again, for liberals and Democrats, being aware of the encyclical definitely increased their perceived credibility of the Pope. So they were like, yes, you're talking about this, you're credible, you're great. You are like the authoritative voice on this. However, for Republicans, it's the other way around. So when they heard about encyclical, they're more likely to say that Pope is not credible. He is not a scientist. He has no credibility to talk about this issue at all. So I think that is just a way of how people deal with this so-called cognitive dissonance and to deal with this cross pressure. And again, it happens to Catholics and non-Catholics at the same time. Okay, so just to sum up from the study, first of all, like follow the like encyclical release and Pope's visit. What we have observed is American Catholics did not change their beliefs about climate change. And then while liberals expressed some heightened concerns about it, if being aware of the encyclical, conservatives expressed lower concerns. And then what's most interesting is like this environmental call from this very top leader of the Catholic Church actually backfired with conservative non-Catholics and Catholics who, number one, resisted his message, and number two, devalued his credibility as someone who can talk about the moral obligations of dealing with climate change. And then going back to the question that's from the audience, like, has things changed, right? So 7 years passed, I've been, studying the thing like for quite a few years, and then like have people's opinions change, and especially considering the fact that Pope Francis actually had persistently talking about these issues at different occasions, at different events, and most recently at COP27, he made a very strong presence at a conference and kind of just talk about this idea of advocating for climate change actions. And then like earlier, like last year, I think he was also at the COP26, just really call on like different governments to do more about climate change. So he had really continued doing the things and sending the messages around. However, I found a study like from this journal called Environmental Research Letters, and this is really, really interesting. Like they actually analyzed the content of like the teaching columns of Catholic bishops around the United States, and they were trying to see if, bless you, if climate change and global warming or anything equivalent was mentioned at all in the columns that are distributed by different US bishops. And they have like this little map there that counted like how many times like the word was mentioned. And surprisingly, only 0.8% of the columns talk about climate change at all, like during the past few years. And then like among these very small numbers of columns, they only come from, 53 of the 201 bishops in the data set. So it's like 1/4 of the bishops around the country. And then like this map, you can see like there are some areas of the country that has these issues talked about more often than the other areas, like the purple ones and the dark blue ones are the bishops, like where the bishops are, like they talk about this issue more oftenly. And then I have another map on the side that just shows like the general opinion distribution in this country. So this map is produced by Yale University, that they have like a climate change attitudinal tracking like research program. And then you can see like around the country, a majority of the locations, the majority of the areas where people actually have fewer concerns about global warming. And there are certain areas where people have higher than average concerns about climate change. So looking at these two maps, I wonder what people think. Like, is there anything that you guys observe from these two maps, like being put side to side?
Seems like New Mexico might be one of the few places where it overlaps between the greater than average concern and number of columns.
Yes, exactly. So New Mexico, so in this country, like in America, there's definitely an increase in Hispanic Catholics. So I wonder if that would be one of the reasons, because that's an area like, people do care about climate change, and, like in that same area, the bishops and the Catholic churches do talk about climate change more often than the other areas. And another thing I noticed is like for a lot of the coastal areas, even in Texas, people care more about climate change, right? And then I think the same thing happened here. It's just like, the conversations within the church really just happened, in the areas where people already have some concerns about climate change. It's not like, you can actually start conversations where people don't care about it. So going back to that question, I don't have like opinion data during the past 7 years. I was trying to find something like that, but I think this is really gave us a good sense about how this issue hasn't been really discussed among the Catholic Church, even if it's discussed. First of all, it's like few times, during the past few years. And then like it only happened in the areas where climate change is already a concern. So it's very geographically segregated if you look at the conversation and discussion. And I hope that answers people's earlier question too. And so, yeah, sure, go ahead, sorry.
Hispanics in Mexico are almost entirely descended from the original
Right.
settlers from Spain.
Yeah.
They're not Mexicans.
Right.
European Hispanics. So I mean, they have a much longer heritage in New Mexico. I'm wondering if that might have some influence on these attitudes.
Yes, maybe. Yeah. I never thought about that, but I think that could be one of the reasons. Yeah, so I think like going off that, I just want to maybe talk a little broadly about what we have learned from this case, right? So like I said, this is a very, very interesting study, because for communication people, for science communication, for environmental communication, for a very long time, there is this almost like dominant idea that if you want to talk to someone regarding some controversial issue, you need to leverage people's credibility. You need to like, use someone that's perceived to be super credible, like, a political leader, a scientist, or even like a Hollywood star or someone to initiate a conversation. And then in this case, you have Pope. you have the Pope, the pontiff of the Catholic Church, talking to its church members. And I think nothing can be more ideal than this, right? So it needs something good needs to happen here, but still you don't see that much of an effect. So I think from a communication perspective, what we can learn is leveraging one's existing credibility for communication can be futile. It may even fail. So I think what's more important is to really talk about these issues in a way that's relatable to people. Like you use people's languages, you talk to people's concerns, and then you establish that credibility in the first place, and then use it to further convince people and to achieve some kind of outcomes from there. So that's my take on it. But it'll be interesting to see how this issue and how like Pope continuously plays a role into like maybe changing people's minds regarding climate change. And then after that, I want to maybe just talk more broadly about like how, we can potentially like unite faith and science and policy for some kind of actions on climate change. And like I mentioned before, like the current president, Joe Biden, is actually one of the only two United States presidents who's Catholic. And, I've read some articles, some commentaries that has this very interesting point that says, Joe Biden actually shares a lot of like personal kind of characteristics with the Pope in terms of being very humble and low key and have this like very high level of approachiness. There is a potential for like political leaders like him and others to use the language of the common good and environmental stewardship to sort of advance policies for just like climate change. However, I think based on our data, based on what we found, it can be potentially a long shot because a lot of the backlashes that he like the Pope has seen from the far right can be happening to the president as well. So I think it needs some like more careful thinking in terms of how we advocate for climate change actions, especially for the religious people or for people on the right who have like different political ideologies than people who are supporting climate change actions. And then the last thing I want to share today is like what happens to the overall like opinion climate to climate change in this country. Like after the passing of the Inflation Reduction Act that aims to curb the carbon emission, actually the division between partisans' attitudes in climate change got widened like during the past few months. And this is the newest data from Pew Research Center in 2020. And you can see that there is a widened gap between Democrats and Republicans in terms of thinking whether we're doing the right thing for climate. And then you can see for this question, they ask people whether Biden's climate policies are taking the country in right or wrong direction. And for Republicans, it's more than 80% of the people think it's the wrong direction. And for Democrat, it's another 80% think this is the right direction. So the number difference, the number discrepancies, if you look at some of the previous data, it's even larger. Like people are even more polarized after this administration's policies on climate change. And even within Democrats, you can see people are not really happy about what's going on here, right? So only a relatively small portion of people would say that there has been enough of being done, like just from this government. However, there are more people would say that it could be more that have been done regarding this issue. So yeah, that's all I have for today. I want to leave it more as of like an open-ended discussion for people, just in case if anybody has any idea regarding anything that I talk about today, especially like how can we talk about this issue? How can we address like different audiences regarding this very challenging like crisis that we are all facing as humanities, but clearly it's so hard to change people's opinions and I wonder how people think about it. So
Yeah, feel free to use the chat to share your questions or thoughts on this issue. I guess I'm curious, to think I think there's evidence that the parties themselves have gotten more polarized over the since 2015. Is it, and So one question is it worth it to try to convince, if I'm a Democrat and I'm trying to convince a Republican why climate change is an issue,
Right.
is it worth trying to convince them or trying to figure out what values
Right.
to try to activate to join the team, or should we just plow ahead and do it and not try so hard?
Yeah, exactly. That's a really, really good question. I don't know if the online folks have heard that question. It's like, so is it worth the efforts of doing the convincing? Oh, yeah, this is a very interesting question. If Scott, you don't mind, I can probably just address this one first. Like Todd has a question. A major thrust of the Pope's encyclical is the need to work with the indigenous peoples and to draw from their wisdom on how to care for the earth. That's a really, really good point. I didn't really bring it up in the slides, but I totally agree with you. That's one of the themes there as well. So I haven't surveyed the reactions to that aspect. I would love to survey that again, given like the whole diversity, inclusion kind of conversations that happen in different parts of the country. I think especially during the past few years, as people think more about the diversities, the minority groups, the indigenous people, I think it'll be interesting to see how people react to that and how maybe not just the political partisans, but maybe like people with different racial identities, with different like cultural and ethnic backgrounds would react to that particular theme. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't have any data on that, but I think that will be an interesting study to do. And another, yes.
I'm wondering, did you do any research as far as how the encyclical was received, say, in Europe? I would think that they tend to be more progressive and more enlightened.
Right.
Find it over there then.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I didn't do any study, like data collection there, but I would agree with you. I would say like, the encyclical it's probably going to be received differently in different cultures. Yeah, just because, people see like the Pope differently, and also because the political atmosphere is so different in different countries. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree on that. Yeah. Okay, here's another comment. The Catholic Church now has a major effort towards grassroots support called the Laudato movement. Yes, yeah, that's something I am aware of. Thank you so much for bringing it up. And among other things, they have just released a 1-hour documentary. Yes, I'm so glad that you bring it up, because the Pope also shows up in that documentary to see if this has any effect on Catholic attitudes. Yes, I would agree on that, because this whole idea of using like movies and documentaries to engage wider audiences is definitely something trendy. It's not just the Pope, like Hollywood and even like the national academies and other like institutions. They're definitely investing a lot of efforts just trying to combine like entertainment, science, and other forces to together like form some more powerful messages for people. So it'll be great to see if that works better than just like a encyclical or like more textual messages. So yeah, thank you so much. Okay, sure. So John's question is, have you thought about what it would take to influence Republican Catholics to put more faith in the words of the Pope, or bishops to follow him more? Yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? Yeah, I think this is a really, really interesting question. Like what it would take to influence Republican Catholics. So first of all, I think it's just so hard, right? Because I mean, like for Americans, I think like the Pope, like, it's to some extent is still like a very distant figure. And I think it's just very, very hard because he takes very progressive positions on many issues that the more traditionalists like Catholics in this country disagree. So yeah, I don't know what would it take exactly, but I think like either way, it's going to be like a long shot. It's going to be hard to change people's minds.
That's interesting. I was listening to a podcast the other day about how, there are so many issues that are baked into an identity of both Democrats and Republicans. And so to try to convince someone to change their identity around this one issue, but still keep all the other issues that they care about in their same identity, that's gonna be really difficult.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And that same thing is just so-called like cross pressure that we do describe in this study is like, yeah, you may agree with like Pope on abortion, but his other things is just like nothing that you can accept. So it's so hard for people to change and remain consistent. So I think according to our study, you can see that the only way that people can get out is just to devalue the credibility of the Pope on this particular issue. Therefore, they don't have to like suffer that cognitive dissonance that they have experienced. So yeah, there's a question from Mary. Yes, there's significant concern about climate change on the California coast, but the bishops there are not generally mentioning climate change, except in San Diego, because they're highly conservative.
There's another question as well.
Yeah, so let's look at this map again. Yeah, so right, so San Francisco, no data. Yeah, but there's also some areas that just no data. So I feel like, California, if you look at it as a state and compared to many other states, it still shows like a relatively high level of discussion. And San Diego, I would say is probably here, but upper California, there's some discussions there. It should be California here, right? Is it California? Yeah.
It's more like second.
Right. The Silicon Valley kind of, yeah. So, okay.
There's a question Renee asked, have you connected with Catholic Climate Covenant on their network and how they see Catholics responding to their efforts?
Okay, so on their network and see how it's no, I haven't connected with any of the covenant that you're talking about. I think it'll be great to actually talk to like some of the insiders and see like what is some of the inside conversations that happen within the church. Yeah, I think that's a really, really good idea. Yeah, but I haven't done anything like that. All right, did I answer all of the questions?
Yeah, feel free, you have a question in the room or any other questions or comments online?
Yeah, I have one more. The predecessor to Francis Ferdinand, he was not nearly as progressive.
Right.
That's how he's regarded.
Yeah.
Did he take any stands on environmental issues?
Not that I was aware of. There might be something just on vaguely and very generally on environmental stewardship, but not as specific as climate change.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like you said, he was not that progressive. So, and climate change, I don't think was even a thing like in his era. So yeah, I think the way he talk about things is more like, oh, like we're stewards of our environment, so we take care of the earth, but that's not the major theme of his teaching.
One thing that comes to mind too is in Wisconsin, we have the Wisconsin Conservative Energy Forum, I believe it's called. It's trying to reframe, I think, the conversation to show, renewable energy as an economic benefits to the state. And so it kind of gets at like reframing and trying to connect with values.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think something like that will work potentially better than the morality frame, because in my other study, like I did like sort of like a meta analysis on just how different types of frames work, and the economy one is definitely one of the most effective frames that resonates with a lot of people who are a little skeptical about climate change. And morality, yeah, it doesn't work it doesn't fly anywhere, because I mean it's just like so soft, and it really doesn't really touch on like people's core concerns about like their the national security or economy or anything like that. So yeah, I agree that the overall like the economy frames, like either in terms of highlighting the benefits or like how much cost it can save by like doing some of the newer energies, would be a better route to go like in the long run. All right, if no other questions, thank you guys so much for having me. And again, sorry about the sound issue at the beginning. This is all new to me, so hopefully this is still like working for you guys. And just feel free to let me know if you have any questions. I'd be more than happy to have like offline or like any other conversations just through emails or anything. Thank you guys so much. Thank you.
And we'll see you all for our final seminar in 2 weeks on biofuels and energy and land use. So hope to see you all online or in person for that.
Yes, yes, and happy holiday too, guys. Thank you so much.
Where are you originally from?
I'm from China.